maybe this is an interesting follow-on to the previous very interesting panel, which of course was about storytelling around science, where science was really the star of the story. And obviously that's hugely important, and that's probably what most of us think about, telling the story of science and putting science at the center. But I think what we're going to be talking about now is kind of decentering science a little bit and putting, and these are ideas that have come up already today, but putting sort of the issues and questions of practice at the center to reveal the ways in which science is a tool to helping communities or organizations achieve their purpose. So it's just a different way of thinking about what science communication is about. So I'm going to be sharing let me see if this is going to work. I'm going to be sharing, I'll share it either way, but this is not working. Research on the use of research. So there's actually a field called the use of evidence in practice, and there's a whole body of research about it. And really my goals are to, I walked out of the room with this, I don't know if I messed something up. My goals are to give you just a couple of thinking tools for the next part of the conversation. Basically, just very briefly about me, as I was just introduced, I'm the PI of an NSF-funded project. It's a multi-year project called the Research and Practice Collaboratory. And I myself have led and continue to lead several research practice partnerships. And I'll talk for a second at the very end of that before we hear about one in much more depth. And I also just want to say, just to position myself, that I am a researcher, I'm a learning scientist, but I've also been a practitioner and a science educator and a communicator in my own way. Worked at the Exploratorium in San Francisco for about 25 years. So I'm going to talk about 3 points. One is to talk about kind of different ways that we can conceptualize. Yay.
Okay.
That's good, that's perfect. Except you missed my animation joke, which I never do, but it was the research on the use of research. But anyway, let me just jump on. So 3 points: different cultural models for research and practice, how to think about it. Again, so that as we talk about it, these are the sort of guides for thinking, or anchors perhaps, a range of ways that research is used, and also details on this collaborative model of research practice partnerships. So there is this whole body of research on the use of research, and without going into details, the W.T. Grant Foundation has a whole initiative about how to support more use of research. Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching has been a group that's been advancing something called improvement science, which comes out of the health sciences, but also now is being adapted for education. There's a British organization called the Research Unit for Research Utilization, notice the spelling. And then also just to say that the National Science Foundation has a whole new initiative funding specifically research practice partnerships in the field of computer science for all, with the idea of it's a new field. We don't really know how to really make computer science, first of all, get it into the schools and make it equitable. And so building research practice partnerships from the start can actually help practice. That's basically the idea. So there's multiple different models, and Dietram referred to these in the very opening statement. One, the traditional way people think about it is research to practice. So how to get research into practice. So that's the traditional way we think about it. There's also this sort of more exchange model of both research sort of informing practice and practice sort of informing research, and that's a model that was also referred to. And then what we'll be talking about today, I think, is really when they come together. So it's research and practice really in a more hybrid form. There are different ways to think about this. In the first model, you're really just sort of raising people's awareness. You're raising practitioners' awareness of research that's out there that might be of use to them. That's kind of like a traditional teaching model. And actually, it's a model that's been debunked certainly in education and learning. Just telling somebody something isn't really going to make them really even understand how to make sense of it. There's this cultural exchange model, and then there's this notion of research and practice together, which is called by Larry Palinka's collaboration and adaptation. And really, I think a key word there to flag is adaptation, because what you get in this hybrid form is accommodation on all sides, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Some of the kind of maybe the sort of demands of each of these models is in the first case, just as in traditional forms of education, for that sort of idea of research going into practice, just straight over the sort of throwing it over the transom, that model to work, you really need somebody who wants to know. Like that's the fundamental. They have to be receptive already. There's a resonance with the way you share it, and we've talked about that, and a readiness. But if those conditions aren't in place, it's sort of an uphill battle. And the second, with sort of like learning, like listening, sort of this cultural exchange, you really need sort of interest and patience as you kind of want to know, but you have to be patient as you sort of navigate different language, different sort of ways of speaking, and that sort of thing. And then finally, in this more collaborative model, research and practice together, first of all, it's expensive, takes a lot of time and a lot of money to actually create the conditions where you can spend the time together to develop the relationships and trust that you can actually begin to work with and for each other. And that actually takes certain kinds of dispositions. And one of the things we're doing right now in science education is we're studying what are the dispositions that make really good partners in research practice collaborations. And some of what the research is showing on what happens with research practice collaborations is that they really lead to, so research into practice can lead to new insights if you have that receptivity. When you have this exchange, you kind of get not only insights like, aha, that's interesting, but you get maybe people thinking about how to use it. But then with this more collaborative model, what the research is starting to show is that you're finding that there's much more, not only insights, uses, and you get allies. You sort of have expanded your professional circles. You have people watching your back in a different way from new perspectives and with different sort of toolkits, and you actually get new directions in your work. So those are some of the things the research is documenting about that kind of approach. Jumping to another body of research around research use, there are kind of these 4 different ways that people, and there are plenty more, but this is sort of in the literature, 4 fundamental ways that people use research. Oftentimes we think about it in one way, or we're thinking about it, different people in the room are thinking about it in different ways. So the first is this notion of imposed research uses. So that's when there's this research, you are told, that's typical in sort of government policy, let's say, you must use this research, you must organize this classroom in this way, you must implement this procedure, that's imposed. Instrumental is the way a lot of times we think about it, where there's research knowledge and then somebody's going to take it and just put it into their practice. Going to pick it up and go and put it into their practice. That's sort of the traditional research to practice model. Justification is the model where, and this is very common for practitioners, I just want the research which is going to show that I'm doing it right and doing it well. It's going to, or that it needs to be done. That's what I want the research for, to justify the work that I either want to do or feel like needs to be done. And the fourth is conceptual, and that's kind of where it's actually more of research is used as more of a thinking tool. So that's a space where it's not that you're necessarily going to plop those ideas into your practice, but they're questions and maybe methods, but probably questions and findings that are thought-provoking, that can stimulate how you think about your own work. So an interesting thing to think about is, in a lot of ways, I think that researchers, and in this case what I'm talking about are science communicators and scientists who are communicating are the practitioner in this model. And then people who are studying how that is done are the researchers, so social science researchers. So they're probably most interested in how, researchers are most interested perhaps in how research results are used in these 2 models. Just instrumentally, I did all this work, can you take it and use it? Or I did all this work, will somebody tell them to take it and use it? Like that's one model. And then practitioners are probably more often thinking about it in this space. I really just wish somebody would know how to manage my classroom so it would work really well, or how to do this so it'll work really well. Or, as I said earlier, would give me the research which shows that I know what I'm doing, or you should give me support to do what I'm doing. But I think a question for us, and this is certainly where we start to move into the research practice space a little bit more, is this conceptual space. How am I doing for time? Is that right? Okay. So this conceptual space, sort of where the thinking is happening. So that's kind of what I'm going to just close out with right now, which is thinking a little bit about research practice partnerships, RPPs, which is where this hybridity happens of research and practice. So a few framing statements about that, then we'll hear it more in depth. Fundamentally, research practice partnerships are very much focused on a problem of practice. And that relates to what I said earlier about kind of decentering from, oh, look at this great question I as scientist had and what I found out, which you should be interested in, and we could be interested in, and you may be interested in. This is more like, I understand you have this problem. And actually, I really care about that problem too. Earlier today, the issue of whether humility was essential came up. And that really struck me because I felt like it's actually not humility, it's really just a shared passion for addressing something that matters to everybody. And in that space, everybody's a learner, and so humility is somewhat natural in that space. So it's not feigned in any way, it's actually just that people work together because they can learn from each other to achieve something that they both want to do. And as I said, science is decentered, meaning it's not the purpose, it's actually a tool in the toolkit for achieving some other purpose. So there's a whole literature emerging. I've got a book on it that came out last year, and there's a couple of books and lots of papers coming out. But these are sort of the 5 foundational elements of how research practice partnerships are being described in science education, I should say. In education, I should say, not just science. First, as I said, they address a pressing problem of practice, meaning something that actually really matters and is actually probably persistent over time. That they are mutualistic, and that's a good research word, but it means, there's really shared commitment. And there's mutually of interest, there's a vested interest, shared vested interest in it. That it generates original analysis, so it is research. It's collecting data, it's interpreting and analyzing and presenting data to the field, building the knowledge base. Very importantly, we're finding, and in this whole project out of NSF that I'm involved in now, many of the research practice partnerships weren't adequately funded to scaffold the time that's needed to bring people together, to really formulate questions together, to formulate feasible ways of collecting data to answer those questions, and then ultimately to sort of be looking at data together and analyzing. So they're very intentionally structured to foster time together, relationship development, trust, so that people really bring their perspectives to the table. And I should say in education, a lot of times a research practice partnership involves maybe 5 to 10 people who are at the core of the partnership, who, let's say, come together on a monthly basis, and I could talk about that later. And also the final thing is that they're really long-term and open, meaning that they're open-ended. It's not like, I'll see you later after this. This is not a contract. This is like, we have a shared interest and a problem. For all we know, we're going to be working together for the rest of our careers. Like that, it matters in that way. Some sort of takeaways about that is you actually have, your problem is my problem in a research practice partnership. I'm not doing you a favor, we want to work on this together. The benefits, as a researcher stepping in, I am not having to guess or imagine what the situation is or the terrain, but I have an expert inside knowledge in my practitioner partner who knows the terrain. And because of that, we can locate sort of the point of change more easily and more quickly. And the last thing I want to say is it really, it both requires and it also generates a lot of generosity and empathy between people. So there's a chemistry that has to happen. Outcomes, improved practice, use of evidence, this is demonstrated in the research base, and very importantly, enhanced professional capacity. So it's not just that knowledge and practice are changing, it's actually the capacity to work together to continue to build knowledge and change in practice. That's being documented in the literature. So really briefly, I've led a few different RPPs. One of the current ones, which was funded in part by the Simons Foundation and also the National Science Foundation, is with Guerrilla Science, which is a science communication group based in London and New York. And I just really wanted to share it in my minus 5 seconds, that just to give you a concrete example, that we came to it from very different spaces. This group does short-term science events in cultural settings, and they wanted to know what happens because they had a lot of excitement, but they wanted to understand better what happens over time to guide their program direction. I came to it as a science educator wanting to know how these short-term engagements really added up to something in a person's life in terms of their relationship with science. So that was sort of a shared thing that we both cared about. But then I come in with sort of a discourse analysis, Bakhtinian framework, a whole bunch of learning science background, which my research partner really doesn't care about. But it doesn't matter because we're working together I'm working on my theory development, but we're both working together on the project and sort of answering the things that he wants to have answered. And I think the thing I want to share is that, over time, in an unexpected way, because of the close discourse analysis I was doing of the science communication, the leader of the program started to think differently about the kinds of training that was needed for the people that were doing the science communication. So he came to really shift his thinking about how to do his program in a way that was never anticipated from the beginning. And separately, I started doing a whole lot of proposal writing for him. And I'm sitting on his board, and I'm like on his sort of speed dial for when he needs help on anything that I can be helpful for. And neither of us signed up for that, but it's been a really productive relationship, and that's one of the results of this kind of work. So thank you.